everyone! How are you today? I am back and I hope you like dinosaurs because today's book is all about some really funny dinosaurs. And I'm wearing a super dinosaur t-shirt just to get with the program. We are reading Tyrannosaurus Drip today, and it has been written by one of my favorite authors, Donaldson, and illustrated by David Roberts. Now I hope you're ready to get into your nook, because we've got a really fun book today, and let's start our Ramaailo read. Shall we begin? Tyrannosaurus Drip by Donaldson and David Roberts. In the swamp beside the river, where the land was thick with veg, lived a herd of Duckbill Dinosaurs who roamed the water's edge. And they hooted up with rivers, and they hooted up with reeds, and they hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water weeds. Now across the rushy river, on a hill the other side, lived a mean Tyrannosaurus with his grim and grisly bride. And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of Duckbill Dinosaur. But the two Tyrannosauruses, so grisly, mean and grim, couldn't catch the Duckbill Dinosaurs because they couldn't swim. And they muttered, "Down with water," and they muttered, "Down with wet," and they muttered, "What a shame that bridges haven't been invented yet." Now a little Compsognathus, but for short we'll call her Comp, found the duckbill egg and stole it from the nest beside the swamp. Very bad. And she swam with it, and she ran with it, and she murmured, "Clever me!" And won't the baby Comps be thrilled with duckbill egg for tea? She dropped the egg in terror and went running for her life from the mean Tyrannosaurus and his grim and grisly wife. And the duckbill egg went rolling, and at last it came to rest in, of all unlikely places, the Tyrannosaurus nest. Oh no! Now Mother T had great big jaws and great enormous legs, but her brain was rather little and she couldn't count her eggs. She sang, "Hatch out, my little terrors, with your scaly little tails and your spiky little toothies and your scary little nails." Out hatched babies number 1 and 2, as perfect as could be, but Mother T was horrified by baby number 3. She grumbled, "He looks weedy," and she grumbled, "He looks weak," and she grumbled, "What long arms, and look, his mouth is like a beak." "He just needs some feeding up," said Dad, and gave the babe some meat. The first 2 gulped and guzzled, but the third refused to eat. And he said, "I'm really sorry," and he said, "I simply can't," and he said, "This meat looks horrible, I'd rather eat a plant." "A plant?" Mum yelled in horror, and Dad said, "Get a grip." His sisters found a name for him, Tyrannosaurus Drip. And they shouted, "Up with hunting!" and they shouted, "Up with war!" and they shouted, "Up with bellyfuls of Duckbill Dinosaur!" Poor Tyrannosaurus Drip tried hard to sing along, but the others yelled, "You silly Drip, you've got the words all wrong." For he hooted, "Down with hunting!" and he hooted, "Down with war!" and he hooted, "Down with bellyfuls of Duckbill Dinosaur!" Drip's sisters soon grew big enough to hunt with Dad and Mum, but they turned on Drip and told him, "You're not fierce enough to come." And he cried, "They've gone without me." And he cried, "Alack a day." And he cried, "This doesn't feel like home. I'm going to run away." Oh dear, he doesn't fit in, does he? And he doesn't feel like he's at home. So he ran off to the river and he saw a lovely sight. A herd of duckbill dinosaurs were all hooting with delight. And they shouted up with rivers, and they hooted up with weeds, and they hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water weeds. As he stood there on the bank, a sudden urge took of him, and he jumped into the water and discovered he could swim. And the duckbills came to greet him by the rushy river's edge, and they hooted, "Nice to see you," and they hooted, "Have some veg." Wow, isn't that great? And Drip, who was delighted that they hadn't run away, ate bellyfuls of water weeds and played with them all day. Then he gazed into the river and asked, "Who, oh who, is that creature in the water?" And they laughed and said, "It's you." That night the lightning crackled and the storm blew down a tree, fell across the river, and the tees cried out, "Yippee!" And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of Duckbill Dinosaur. Drip's sisters stepped onto the bridge, but then began to frown, for there in front of them stood Drip, who yelled, "Look down, look down!" And they looked into the water, and they each let out a yell, "Ah!" One cried out, "Water monsters!" and the other cried out, "Help!" Their mother called out, "Nonsense!" and she joined them on the tree. Then she looked into the water and exclaimed, "Goodness gracious me!" The three of them stood trembling, and Dad said, "Get a grip! You're all of you as drippy as Tyrannosaurus Drip." He strode onto the bridge and scoffed, "I'll bet there's nothing there." Then he looked into the water and he jumped up in the air. How the duckbills hooted when he landed with a crash, and the tree bridge broke in two, and 4 Tyrannosauruses went splash. And sputtering and clinging to the branches of the tree, they went whooshing down a waterfall and went all the way to sea. And the duckbills hooted happily, and they shouted, "Hip, hip, hooray!" for the heroic one and only Duckbill Drip. The end. Wow, look at that. Isn't that such a fun and funny book of first getting lost and then finding where you really belong? This was Tyrannosaurus Drip. It's been written by Julia Donaldson and David Roberts. I hope you really enjoyed this book, and I hope you're going to join me next time for another fun read. And until then, bye-bye!